You'll lose everything," Dad warned. Years later, he asked for a loan to save his business. I slid a check across the table and said, "With interest." The pen felt heavy in my hand as I sat across from my father at our old kitchen table. The same table where he used to help me with homework when I was 8. The same table where he'd lecture me about responsibility when I was 16. And now, the same table where I was writing him a check for $180,000. Dad's hands were trembling slightly as he watched me fill out the amount. Robert Chen, the man who built Chen Construction from nothing, who never showed weakness, who always had all the answers, was sitting there, watching his youngest daughter save his life's work. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I could hear Mom moving around in the kitchen behind us, nervously reorganizing the same dishes she'd already put away twice. Kevin was leaning against the doorframe, his usual confident smirk nowhere to be found. Jessica sat at the far end of the table, bouncing her 2-year-old daughter on her knee, trying to pretend this wasn't the most awkward family moment in our history. 3 years ago, this exact scenario would have been impossible. Not because I didn't have the money then, obviously I didn't, but because 3 years ago, Dad wouldn't have even considered asking me for $20, let alone nearly $200,000. 3 years ago, I was the family disappointment, the one who was throwing her money away, the one who was going to end up broke and begging them for help. "Maya," Dad's voice cracked slightly as he spoke, "I want you to know that this is strictly business. I'll pay you back every penny, with interest, just like we discussed." I looked up from the check and met his eyes. They were the same dark brown eyes that had stared me down 3 years earlier when I made my announcement at Sunday dinner. The same eyes that had filled with disappointment and frustration when I told the family I was putting half my paycheck into investments. Back then, those eyes had been cold, dismissive. Now they were desperate, humble, almost pleading. "I know you will, Dad," I said quietly, tearing the check from the book. 6% annually, payments start in 90 days, just like we agreed. As I slid the check across the table, my mind flashed back to that dinner 3 years ago, the dinner that started everything. I was 21 then, fresh out of college, working my first real job at a marketing agency downtown. I was so excited to share my financial plans with my family, thinking they'd be proud of how seriously I was taking my future. Instead, Dad had slammed his hand on this very table, making all the plates jump. "You're going to lose everything, Maya," he'd said, his voice rising with each word. "This isn't monopoly money. This is your life, your future, and you're gambling it away like some kind of addict." Kevin had laughed, actually laughed, and said, "I give it 6 months before she's asking us for rent money." Jessica, ever the peacemaker, had tried to soften the blow. "Maya, honey, maybe you should start smaller. Put money in a savings account first. Build up some security." But it was Mom's reaction that hurt the most. She just sat there, nodding along with Dad, looking at me like I was a stranger who had somehow ended up at their dinner table. Now, as Dad's fingers closed around the check that would save Chen Construction, I wondered if he remembered that dinner too. If he remembered how certain he'd been that I would fail. How absolutely convinced he was that his youngest daughter was making the biggest mistake of her life. The kitchen was completely silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and my niece's occasional babbling. This moment had been building for 3 years, through every family gathering I'd missed, every phone call where the subject of my gambling problem came up, every time someone in my family assumed I was struggling financially because I chose investments over new clothes or expensive dinners. "Thank you," Dad whispered, folding the check carefully and placing it in his shirt pocket. "I know I don't deserve this, not after everything I said." I stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the linoleum floor that hadn't been updated since my childhood. "You're right, Dad. You don't deserve it. But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for the 15 employees who depend on Chen Construction for their livelihoods. And I'm doing it because 3 years ago you taught me something valuable, even if you didn't mean to." He looked up at me, confusion replacing the gratitude in his eyes. "What did I teach you?" I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. "You taught me that the only person I can count on is myself, and that the best revenge isn't proving people wrong, it's proving yourself right." Growing up as the youngest Chen child meant always being 2 steps behind everyone else's expectations. While Kevin was learning to read blueprints at 12 and Jessica was earning straight A's in advanced placement classes, I was the kid sitting in the corner with a calculator, trying to figure out compound interest from a library book I'd found about personal finance. I remember being 14 years old, watching Dad come home exhausted from job sites, his hands permanently stained with dirt and concrete dust. He'd sit at that same kitchen table, spreading out invoices and receipts, muttering about cash flow and wondering if he'd have enough to cover payroll. Even then, I could see the stress lines forming around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried the weight of providing for 15 families, not just ours. "Maya, bring me the calculator," he'd say, and I'd race to get it, hoping he'd let me help. Sometimes he would, and I'd add up columns of numbers while he double-checked everything by hand. Those were the moments I felt closest to him, like maybe I could be useful, maybe I could contribute something valuable to the family business. But by high school, it became clear that Kevin was the chosen heir to Chen Construction. He spent summers working on job sites, learning every aspect of the business from foundation to finish work. Dad would beam with pride watching Kevin swing a hammer or operate heavy machinery, the same way other parents bragged about their kids' soccer trophies. Jessica found her path through academics. She was student council president, valedictorian, the daughter who brought home college acceptance letters that made Mom cry happy tears. She chose teaching because it was stable, respectable, safe. Everything Dad valued in a career choice. And then there was me, the daughter who spent her teenage years reading investment blogs instead of fashion magazines, who asked for personal finance books for Christmas while my friends wanted makeup and clothes, who calculated how much money I'd have at retirement if I started investing at 18 versus waiting until 30. My family thought it was cute at first. "Maya's going to be rich someday," they'd joke when I'd explain some investment concept I'd learned. But cute turned to concerning when I chose a state school over the private college Jessica attended, specifically because I wanted to graduate debt-free and start investing immediately. "You're limiting your options," Mom worried during my senior year of high school. Jessica's education opened so many doors for her. "I don't need the same doors," I'd argue back. "I'm going to create my own opportunities." Dad would shake his head during these conversations. "Maya, there's no substitute for hard work and real assets. Buildings, equipment, land, things you can touch. This stock market stuff is just gambling dressed up in fancy language." The generational divide felt impossible to bridge. Dad had built everything through physical labor and traditional business practices. In his world, you earned money by creating something tangible, something that served a real purpose in people's lives. The idea that numbers on a screen could generate wealth without producing anything concrete seemed absurd to him. By college graduation, the pattern was set. Kevin was learning advanced construction management, preparing to take over the family business. Jessica was establishing herself as the responsible daughter, married with a stable career and a house in the suburbs. And I was the wild card, the one whose financial theories and investment strategies were met with tolerant smiles and worried glances. None of them understood that every book I read, every financial podcast I listened to, every late night spent researching market trends was my way of trying to contribute something meaningful to our family's future. I just never imagined it would take a crisis for them to see it. My first apartment after college was a 400-square-foot studio on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The elevator worked maybe half the time, the radiator clanked like a ghost in chains, and my kitchen was basically a hot plate and a mini fridge crammed into what used to be a closet. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was cheap. $800 a month for rent, utilities included. That left me with exactly $1,147 for my monthly take-home pay of $2,647 for my marketing coordinator job at Patterson and Associates. Most people my age would have found a roommate, upgraded to a nicer place, maybe bought some actual furniture instead of the folding table and air mattress I called home. But I wasn't most people. Every morning I'd wake up at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of my neighbor's crying baby and immediately check my phone for market updates. Asian markets, European markets, overnight futures trading. By the time I showered and dressed for work, I'd already calculated how much my portfolio had gained or lost while I slept. The routine was sacred. Coffee from the gas station across the street because a coffee maker was an unnecessary expense. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch every single day because they cost roughly 90 cents to make. Dinner was usually ramen noodles or whatever was on sale at the discount grocery store 2 blocks away. My coworkers would order Thai food or grab drinks after work, and I'd politely decline, claiming I had other plans. I did have other plans. Every evening, I'd spread my financial documents across that folding table, like a general planning a military campaign. Bank statements, brokerage account summaries, market research printed from the library because I couldn't afford a home printer. I'd calculate exactly how much I could invest that month down to the penny. $923.50. That was my magic number every month. Half of my remaining income after rent and bare minimum living expenses went straight into my investment accounts. Index funds, individual stocks, a small allocation to cryptocurrency that I researched obsessively. The other half went into a tiny emergency fund and absolute necessities. My family didn't understand the sacrifice this required. When Jessica posted Instagram photos of her new dining room set, Mom would comment asking when I was going to get some real furniture. When Kevin bought his lifted truck, Dad would shake his head and say I needed to stop living like a college student. They saw my lifestyle as evidence that I was struggling, that my career choice was failing me. What they didn't see were the spreadsheets I maintained with obsessive detail, tracking every investment, every dividend payment, every market fluctuation. They didn't see me staying up until midnight reading quarterly earnings reports or researching emerging market trends. The family group chat was the worst part. "Maya's probably eating cereal for dinner again," Kevin would text, followed by laughing emojis. "Someone should check if she needs grocery money," Jessica would add, with what I'm sure she thought was sisterly concern. But the comments that hurt most came during family gatherings. "Maya's gambling addiction is getting expensive," Dad would joke when I'd decline to join them for dinner at expensive restaurants. "She's choosing the stock market over family time." What they called gambling, I called discipline. What they saw as deprivation, I saw as investment in my future. Every dollar I didn't spend on immediate gratification was a dollar working toward my long-term goals. While they were buying comfort and convenience, I was buying freedom. Little did they know, those ramen noodles were funding what would become their salvation. 6 months into my investment journey, something incredible happened. I opened my brokerage app on a Tuesday morning in March, and the numbers staring back at me made me blink twice to make sure I wasn't dreaming. My portfolio had grown from $5,500 to $7,900, a gain of $20,400 in just 6 months, $2,400. That was more money than I'd ever had in my checking account at one time, more than I'd made at any summer job in college. It represented 48 peanut butter and jelly lunches, or 3 months of rent, or proof that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the family failure everyone thought I was. I took a screenshot and stared at it for 15 minutes during my lunch break, sitting alone in the office break room while my coworkers grabbed expensive salads from the bistro downstairs. This was it. This was my moment to show my family that I wasn't throwing my money away, that their youngest daughter actually knew what she was doing. Sunday dinner couldn't come fast enough. I spent the entire week rehearsing how I'd present the news. Nothing too boastful, just a simple, "Hey, remember those investments you were worried about? Well, they're up $2,400 already." I imagined Dad's eyebrows raising in surprise, maybe even a hint of pride. Kevin would have to admit I wasn't completely clueless about money. Mom might finally stop worrying that I was starving myself for some foolish dream. That Sunday, I walked into my childhood home with more confidence than I'd felt in months. The familiar smell of Mom's pot roast filled the kitchen, and for once, I wasn't dreading the inevitable questions about my finances or career prospects. Jessica was already at the table, bouncing her baby on her knee while Kevin helped Dad carve the roast. "Maya," Mom called from the stove. "Perfect timing. We were just talking about you." My heart sank a little. Family conversations about me rarely went well lately. "Oh yeah?" I said, trying to keep my voice light as I took my usual seat. "Kevin was saying you've been pretty quiet in the family group chat lately," Dad said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "We were wondering if everything's okay. Work going all right? You're not having money troubles, are you?" This was perfect, the opening I'd been waiting for. "Actually, work's great," I said, pulling out my phone. "And those investments we talked about? The ones you were worried about? They're doing really well." I showed them the screenshot, my hands trembling slightly with excitement. "I've made $2,400 in 6 months. That's a 28% return." The table went quiet. Dad leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses to look at my phone screen. For a moment, his expression was unreadable, and I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. "Huh," he said slowly, handing my phone back. "That's interesting." Kevin looked over Dad's shoulder at the screen. "Wait, you actually made money? Like real money?" $2,400, I repeated, unable to hide the pride in my voice. "Maya, that's wonderful," Mom said, though she sounded more surprised than proud. For the first time in months, I felt like I belonged at this table. Like maybe I'd finally earned their respect. Dad was asking questions about my strategy, Kevin was listening intently, and even Jessica seemed impressed. Finally, I thought. Finally, they see it. The moment stretched on as Dad continued examining my phone screen, his expression growing more thoughtful. I could feel my heart pounding with anticipation. This was it. This was when everything would change between us. "Tell me about your strategy," Dad said, leaning back in his chair. "How did you pick these investments?" I launched into my explanation, probably talking too fast in my excitement. I told him about my research process, how I'd chosen a mix of broad market index funds and individual stocks in companies I believed had strong fundamentals. I explained my cryptocurrency allocation, my diversification strategy, my long-term timeline. Dad nodded along, asking follow-up questions about expense ratios and dividend yields. Kevin was actually taking notes on a napkin. Even Mom seemed engaged, asking how much time I spent researching each week. For 20 minutes, I felt like a respected member of the family, like someone whose opinions mattered. "That's really impressive, Maya," Dad said finally. "You clearly put a lot of thought into this." I was practically glowing. This was the validation I'd been craving for months. Then Dad's expression shifted. The interested look faded, replaced by something that made my stomach drop. He was smiling, but not in a good way. "Of course," he continued, his voice taking on a different tone. "You do realize that 6 months means absolutely nothing in the market, right?" The warmth I'd been feeling started to evaporate. 6 months is barely a blip. You could lose all of that tomorrow and more. The fact that you're celebrating such a short-term gain just proves how little you understand about real investing. Kevin started chuckling. "Wait, so you were just playing along to see what she'd say?" "I wanted to see if she'd learned anything about risk management or if she was just getting lucky," Dad replied, not even looking at me anymore. "Turns out, it's just luck." The room felt like it was spinning. "Dad, I wasn't celebrating short-term gains. I was showing you that my strategy is working. This is just the beginning." "Maya, honey," Dad's voice took on the patronizing tone I'd heard my entire childhood. "The house always wins. The market always wins. You're not smarter than millions of professional investors and algorithms. You're playing a game where the odds are stacked against you." "But I'm not gambling," I protested, my voice cracking. "I'm investing in diversified index funds and researched companies with strong fundamentals." "That's exactly what every gambler says," Kevin jumped in, clearly enjoying himself now. "They all have systems. They all think they've figured out the secret." Jessica tried to intervene. Maybe we should just be happy that Maya's doing well right now. No, Dad said firmly. That's exactly the wrong attitude. Getting lucky early is the worst thing that can happen to a gambler because it makes them think they know what they're doing. He turned to me, his eyes cold and dismissive. Maya, I've been in business for 25 years. I've seen economic cycles, market crashes, recessions. I've watched people lose everything chasing returns like this. The responsible thing for me to do as your father is to warn you before you lose everything you've saved. Mom nodded in agreement. Your father's right, sweetheart. Maybe you should take your winnings and put them in a nice, safe savings account. Kevin couldn't contain himself anymore. I give it 6 months before she's asking us for rent money. Classic gambler behavior, thinking you're on a hot streak. The laughter that followed felt like a physical blow. I sat there, phone still in my hand, watching my family mock not just my strategy, but my intelligence, my judgment, my future. The respect I'd felt moments earlier was gone, replaced by something much worse than their usual dismissal. This time, they'd given me hope just to take it away. I don't remember driving home that night. One moment I was sitting at the dinner table, feeling smaller than I had since middle school, and the next I was back in my tiny apartment, staring at the four walls that suddenly felt more like a prison than a home. The silence was deafening. No crying baby next door, no traffic noise from the street below, just me and the weight of what had just happened. I sat on my air mattress, still wearing the dress I'd carefully chosen for dinner, the one I thought would make me look more professional, more credible. Now it just felt like a costume I'd worn to play a part I was never qualified for. My phone buzzed. A notification from the family group chat. Kevin. Tonight was actually pretty fun. Maya's face when Dad revealed he was just testing her. Jessica. Kevin, don't be mean, but seriously, Maya, maybe Dad has a point about being more conservative with your money. Mom. We're just worried about you, sweetheart. There's nothing wrong with a nice, stable savings account. Dad. Maya, I hope you understand. I was trying to teach you something important tonight. Sometimes being wrong early saves you from being wrong bigger later. I turned my phone face down and didn't respond. What was the point? They'd made their position clear. In their eyes, I wasn't a thoughtful investor making calculated decisions about my future. I was a naive child playing with money I couldn't afford to lose. The worst part wasn't even the humiliation. It was the realization that they'd never actually listened to me. During those 20 minutes when I thought Dad was genuinely interested, when I was explaining my research process and investment philosophy, he wasn't hearing any of it. He was just waiting for his moment to prove me wrong. Sunday dinners became a thing of the past. When Mom would call and invite me, I'd make excuses. Work was busy. I had plans with friends. I was sick. The lies came easier than the truth, which was that I couldn't bear to sit at that table and pretend everything was normal. My coworkers started asking if I was okay. I'd become even quieter at work, declining their invitations for happy hour or weekend plans. Not because I couldn't afford them anymore, but because I didn't trust my own judgment about anything. If I was so wrong about investing, if I was such a fool for thinking I could build wealth through the stock market, what else was I wrong about? The family group chat continued without me. Photos from Kevin's birthday dinner at an expensive steakhouse. Updates about Jessica's daughter learning to walk. Dad posting articles about local construction projects Chen Construction had won. I'd scroll through it all, feeling like I was watching someone else's family through a window. 3 weeks after that disastrous dinner, Mom called. Maya, we miss you at Sunday dinner. Are you angry with us? No, Mom, I lied. Just busy. Your father feels bad about how things went. He was just trying to protect you. Protect me? From what? From making my own decisions? From taking control of my financial future? From refusing to live paycheck to paycheck like I was supposed to? I know, I said, because it was easier than fighting. Will you come this Sunday? I'm making your favorite lasagna. Maybe next week. But next week never came. Instead, I made a decision that would change everything. If my family thought I was a foolish gambler, fine. I'd show them what a foolish gambler could accomplish. But I'd do it on my own terms, without their approval, without their support, and definitely without their knowledge. The isolation hurt, but it also freed me. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to justify my choices to anyone. 2 months into my self-imposed family exile, I was sitting alone in the office break room, mechanically eating another peanut butter and jelly sandwich while scrolling through market updates on my phone. The Dow was up 200 points. My portfolio was having a good day, but I felt nothing. Success without anyone to share it with felt hollow. Maya Chen, right? I looked up to see Zoe Martinez from the accounting department standing by the microwave with a container of what smelled like homemade curry. We'd exchanged maybe 10 words in the 8 months I'd been working here, mostly about quarterly budget reports. Yeah, that's me. I couldn't help but notice you're always checking financial apps during lunch. She gestured to my phone. Are you into investing? My first instinct was to deflect. After the family disaster, I'd become protective of my financial interests, keeping them private from everyone. But something in Zoe's tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than judgment. A little, I said cautiously. Zoe sat down across from me, uninvited but somehow welcome. What's your strategy? I've been building a portfolio for about 3 years now. Started right after college when I realized my business degree was basically useless without some real financial education. I stared at her. Someone my age, talking about investing like it was normal, like it was smart. Index funds mostly, I said slowly. Some individual stocks, a bit of crypto. Nice. I'm heavy into index funds too. Boring but effective, right? She grinned. My parents think I'm crazy for not keeping everything in savings accounts, but I keep telling them inflation is going to eat their money alive. The relief I felt was almost physical. Here was someone who understood, someone who didn't think I was gambling with my future. My family has the same reaction, I admitted. They think I'm going to lose everything. Families are the worst when it comes to money advice, Zoe said, rolling her eyes. My mom still thinks the stock market is something only rich people do. She doesn't understand that it's literally the only way people like us build wealth. We spent the next 30 minutes talking about our portfolios, our research methods, our long-term goals. Zoe had started with even less money than me, but had been investing consistently for longer. Her account was approaching $30,000. You know what the funny thing is? She said as we headed back to our desks. My family used to worry about my risky investments. Now my little brother asks me for stock tips, and my parents want to know how I have more savings than they do. That evening, I went through my things looking for something I'd almost forgotten about. In a box of books from my childhood bedroom, I found it. A copy of The Intelligent Investor that had belonged to my grandfather. I'd discovered it 2 years ago while helping Mom clean out his study after he passed. Inside the front cover, in his careful handwriting, was an inscription I'd never noticed before. For Maya, the only one who asks the right questions about money, trust your instincts, sweetheart. The world needs more people who think like you do. Grandpa Joe, 2019. 2019. The year before he died. The year I was a senior in college, already planning my investment strategy while my family worried about my unrealistic financial goals. Grandpa Joe had seen something in me that the rest of my family missed. He'd believed in my approach before I'd even started implementing it. And somehow, finding that note felt like getting his permission to keep going, to trust myself even when no one else would. I wasn't as alone as I thought. Finding Grandpa Joe's note changed everything. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. If he believed in me, if someone who'd built a successful small business from nothing thought I was asking the right questions about money, then maybe I should stop second-guessing myself and start doubling down. I called in sick to work that Friday and spent the entire day at the public library, diving deeper into investment research than I ever had before. I wasn't just looking at basic index fund strategies anymore. I was studying sector rotations, analyzing price-to-earnings ratios, researching emerging markets that most retail investors weren't even considering yet. By the following Monday, I'd made a decision that would have horrified my family if they'd known about it. I was going to accelerate my timeline. Instead of the conservative $923 monthly investment I'd been making, I was going to find ways to invest even more. The weekend tutoring job was step one. Every Saturday and Sunday, I'd drive to the suburbs and help high school students with SAT math prep at $40 an hour. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was 4 hours each day that brought in an extra $320 per week. That meant an additional $1,080 per month going straight into my investment accounts. I also started a small side business freelancing social media content for local businesses. My marketing background made it easy work, and most small business owners were happy to pay $200, $300 per month for someone to manage their Instagram and Facebook presence. Within 6 weeks, I had 5 regular clients bringing in another $1,100 monthly. But the real game changer came when I started getting serious about cryptocurrency research. While most people were still treating Bitcoin and Ethereum like lottery tickets, I was studying blockchain technology, reading white papers, analyzing adoption curves. I allocated 15% of my portfolio to carefully researched crypto positions, focusing on projects with real utility and strong development teams. The numbers started adding up quickly. Between my day job, tutoring, freelance work, and aggressive budgeting, I was now investing $20,500 per month. Some months, when I had extra freelance projects, it was closer to $3,000. My lifestyle didn't change at all. Same tiny apartment, same peanut butter sandwiches, same secondhand clothes. But my portfolio was growing at a rate that would have shocked anyone who knew me. $15,000 became $25,000, then $40,000, then $65,000. The crypto allocation, which everyone said was gambling, was performing especially well. What started as a $2,000 position had grown to nearly $18,000 in just 8 months. Zoe and I started meeting for coffee every few weeks to discuss our strategies and celebrate our wins. She was amazed by my growth rate, but also impressed by my research methodology. "You're not just getting lucky," she told me one afternoon. "You're actually becoming really good at this." The best part was the silence. No family group chat messages about my gambling problem, no lectures about responsible financial planning, no concerned calls from Mom asking if I needed grocery money. They thought I was still the same struggling recent graduate eating ramen every night and throwing away small amounts of money on risky investments. They had no idea that their financially irresponsible daughter was becoming more financially secure than any of them had ever been. Every month that passed, every milestone I hit in silence, I felt a little stronger and a little more independent. By the 18-month mark, I had something I'd never had before: real financial power. And absolutely no one in my family knew about it. While I was quietly building wealth, my family was living in a completely different reality. The family group chat continued to buzz with updates about their lives, and from their perspective, everything was going exactly as expected. Kevin was thriving in the construction business, Jessica was the perfect suburban mom with her teaching career, and Maya was probably still struggling with her foolish investment hobby. The assumptions they made about my life would have been funny if they weren't so revealing. When Jessica posted photos from her family vacation to Disney World, Mom commented, "I wish Maya could afford to do things like this." When Kevin bought a new motorcycle, Dad's response was, "At least one of my kids knows how to spend money responsibly." I'd see these comments when I checked the group chat during my lunch breaks, sitting in the same break room where I'd first connected with Zoe. The irony was staggering. While they worried about my ability to afford a vacation, I was calculating whether to increase my monthly investment from $20,500 to $3,000. While they praised Kevin's responsible motorcycle purchase, I was watching my portfolio grow by more than the cost of his bike every few months. But their blindness went beyond just misunderstanding my financial situation. They were equally blind to the changes happening in their own world. Dad had been aggressively expanding Chen Construction, taking on larger commercial projects and buying expensive equipment. "Strike while the iron's hot," he'd told Kevin, according to family gossip. "This construction boom won't last forever, so we need to maximize our growth now." The problem was, Dad was financing this expansion with debt, bank loans for equipment, credit lines for materials, extended payment terms with suppliers. Every conversation Kevin shared from work involved Dad talking about cash flow management and leveraging opportunities. To hear them tell it, business was booming and Chen Construction was unstoppable. Kevin had caught the same fever. The motorcycle was just the beginning. He'd also bought a lifted truck, upgraded his apartment to a luxury condo, and started talking about buying investment property. Dad says I need to start building assets while I'm young, he'd announced at a family dinner I didn't attend, but heard about through Mom. Jessica, meanwhile, was planning her kitchen renovation and talking about private school for her daughter. We can afford it now that Kevin's doing so well in the business, she'd told Mom, and it's good to invest in family. None of them seemed to notice the subtle signs that the construction boom might be cooling. Dad would mention losing bids to competitors, but he'd frame it as other companies undercutting with unrealistic prices. Kevin would complain about delayed payments from clients, but he'd shrug it off as just how business works. From my perspective, watching through social media posts and secondhand family updates, it looked like they were making classic expansion mistakes, growing too fast, assuming good times would continue indefinitely, and taking on debt based on optimistic projections. But I wasn't part of their inner circle anymore, so my observations stayed to myself. The most telling moment came when Mom called me one evening in late fall. "Maya, I hope you're not still putting money into those risky investments," she said. "Your father's been reading about market volatility, and he's worried about you." I was looking at my portfolio balance when she called. It had just crossed $120,000 that morning. "Thanks for the concern, Mom," I said. "I'm being careful." "Good. It's just that we see how well Kevin's doing with real assets and stable income, and we worry that you're missing out on real opportunities." Real opportunities. While they worried about my future, I was building the financial foundation that would soon save all of them. The call came on a Tuesday morning in February. I was in my office, reviewing quarterly reports for one of my freelance clients, when my phone buzzed with Dad's contact photo. We hadn't spoken directly in over 6 months. My stomach immediately tightened with a familiar anxiety I thought I'd outgrown. "Maya, it's Dad." His voice sounded different, strained, older somehow. "Hi, Dad. Is everything okay?" There was a long pause, the kind that means nothing is okay. "I need to talk to you about something. Can you come by the house tonight? It's important." My first instinct was to make an excuse. Work meeting, prior commitment, anything to avoid another confrontation about my life choices. But something in his tone stopped me. This wasn't the confident, lecturing Dad I remembered. This was someone who sounded genuinely worried. "Sure. What time?" 7 o'clock. "And Maya, could you not mention this to Kevin or Jessica yet? I want to talk to you first." The request was so unusual that I agreed without thinking. Dad always presented a united front with Mom, and family decisions were typically made collectively. The idea that he wanted to speak to me privately, without the others knowing, felt significant. I spent the rest of the day distracted, running through possible scenarios. Maybe he wanted to apologize for the dinner debacle 18 months earlier. Maybe Mom had convinced him to be more supportive of my investment strategy. Or maybe something was seriously wrong with his health, and he needed to tell someone. By 6:30, I was sitting in my car outside my childhood home, gathering courage. The house looked exactly the same, but I felt like a completely different person than the defeated 24-year-old who'd last walked through that front door. My portfolio had crossed $180,000 the week before. I owned more liquid assets than anyone in my family, yet here I was, nervous about facing my father. Mom answered the door with a hug that felt desperate rather than welcoming. "Maya, sweetheart, I'm so glad you could come. Your father's in his office." Dad's home office was where he'd always handled the serious business of Chen Construction. Financial planning, contract negotiations, the kinds of important decisions that had built our family's middle-class stability. I'd always felt intimidated in this room, surrounded by his certificates and awards, photos of completed projects, evidence of his business success. Tonight, he looked small behind his massive oak desk. Papers were scattered everywhere, and his usually organized space looked chaotic. His computer screen showed multiple spreadsheet tabs, and I could see enough numbers to recognize financial statements. Thanks for coming, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. The same chair where I'd received lectures about responsibility, where we'd discussed my college plans, where he'd once tried to convince me to study something more practical than marketing. Dad, what's going on? You're scaring me. He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture I'd never seen from him before. Robert Chen had always been the man with all the answers, the one who confidently guided our family through every challenge. This version of him was unfamiliar and concerning. Maya, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I nodded, having no idea what was coming. How much money do you actually have saved? Not what we've been assuming, but really, how much? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that everything was about to change. The question hung between us like a live wire. Dad's eyes were fixed on mine, and I could see the desperation he was trying so hard to hide behind his usual stoic expression. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since that humiliating dinner 18 months ago. Dad, why are you asking? He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time in my life, I watched my father struggle to find words. Chen Construction is in trouble, Maya. Real trouble. We've had 3 major contracts fall through in the past month. 2 clients have defaulted on payments. The bank won't extend our credit line. The numbers on his computer screen suddenly made sense. Cash flow projections, accounts receivable, debt calculations. I could see the red columns even from across the desk. How much trouble? We need $180,000 within 30 days, or we're done. 25 years of building this business, 15 employees who depend on us, everything we've worked for. His voice cracked slightly. I've exhausted every other option. The bank, our suppliers, other contractors. Nobody's lending in this market. I felt a strange calmness wash over me. After months of my family treating me like a financial disaster waiting to happen, the man who'd called my investment strategy gambling was sitting across from me, broke and desperate. Dad, you still haven't answered my question. Why are you asking about my savings? He looked down at his hands. Kevin suggested we ask you for help. I told him you probably didn't have much, but he said maybe you could contribute something small. Maybe a few $1,000s to help with payroll while we figure out other solutions. A few $1,000s. They still thought I was the struggling daughter eating ramen and throwing away tiny amounts on risky investments. What if I told you I could cover the entire amount? Dad's head snapped up. Maya, this isn't a joke. We need $180,000, real money, not a few hundred from your investment account. I pulled out my phone and opened my brokerage app. My portfolio balance glowed on the screen, $347,892.47. I turned the phone around and slid it across his desk. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Dad picked up my phone with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the numbers. He blinked hard, then looked at the screen again, as if the numbers might change. This is your account? Your actual account? That's my actual account. $347,000. He said it slowly, like he was translating a foreign language. Maya, how is this possible? Remember that dinner when you told me I'd lose everything? When you said I was gambling and the house always wins? I've been investing consistently for 3 years. The gambling addiction you were so worried about has generated more wealth than I ever imagined possible. Dad set my phone down carefully, as if it might break. You can actually help us. I can save Chen Construction entirely. I can write you a check tomorrow that will solve all your problems and leave me with enough to continue building my future. The power shift was complete. The daughter who'd been dismissed as financially irresponsible was now the only thing standing between her father's business and bankruptcy. The man who'd lectured me about real assets and stable investments was being rescued by the portfolio he'd called foolish. Maya, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet, Dad, but we need to talk about terms. Terms? Dad repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. The word seemed foreign to him, like he couldn't quite grasp that his youngest daughter was now dictating conditions to save his life's work. This is a business transaction, Dad. A loan, not a family bailout. Before he could respond, Mom appeared in the doorway. Robert, is everything okay? I heard voices and… She stopped mid-sentence when she saw my phone on Dad's desk, the portfolio balance still glowing on the screen. Linda, sit down, Dad said quietly. We need to tell Maya about the business situation. What business situation? Mom moved closer, her eyes darting between Dad's haggard expression and my strangely calm demeanor. Robert, what's happening? Chen Construction is bankrupt without an immediate cash injection of $180,000, I said matter-of-factly, and apparently your gambling-addicted daughter is the only one who can provide it. Mom's legs seemed to give out. She sank into the chair beside Dad's desk, staring at my phone like it was displaying alien technology. Maya, that can't be real. That's almost $400,000. $347,892.47 to be exact. Dad's phone buzzed. A text message. It's Kevin, he said, glancing at the screen. He's asking if I've talked to you yet about contributing to the family emergency. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Contributing? What did you tell Kevin I might be able to offer? I said maybe 5,000, 10 at most. Dad looked physically ill. Maya, I need you to understand. We genuinely thought… You thought I was broke. You thought your gambling-addicted daughter was living paycheck to paycheck, eating ramen because I couldn't afford real food. I wasn't angry anymore. I was past anger. You've spent 3 years making jokes about my financial choices at family dinners I stopped attending. 3 years assuming I'd eventually come crawling back, asking you for money. Mom was crying now, soft tears that she tried to hide behind her hands. We were trying to protect you. From what? From financial independence? From building wealth? From proving that maybe, just maybe, your youngest daughter understood something about money that you didn't? Dad's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Jessica. She wants to know if she and Kevin should come over to discuss the family financial situation. Call them, I said. They should hear this. Maya, maybe we should… Call them, Dad. If this is a family emergency, the family should know how it's being resolved. 30 minutes later, Kevin and Jessica sat in the living room, both looking confused and increasingly uncomfortable as Dad explained the business crisis. When he got to the part about my portfolio balance, Kevin actually laughed. Wait, Maya has almost $400,000? Maya? Our Maya? He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. How is that possible? Those risky investments you've been making fun of for 3 years, I said simply. Jessica was staring at her hands. Maya, I'm so sorry. We never meant to… Yes, you did, I interrupted. You meant every joke, every concerned comment, every assumption that I was too naive to manage my own money. You meant all of it. Kevin's cocky demeanor had completely evaporated. So, you can actually save Dad's business? I can? But like I told Dad, this isn't charity. It's a business loan with terms, interest, and a repayment schedule. The room fell silent. For the first time in my adult life, my family was hanging on my every word. 13. Protagonist's inner victory. Maya doesn't gloat or seek revenge. She writes the check but sets clear terms. This is a business loan with 6% annual interest and a formal repayment schedule. She's not angry anymore. She's moved beyond needing their validation. Her confidence comes from within now, not from family approval. Sitting in that living room, watching my family process the reality of their situation, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even the sweet taste of revenge I'd sometimes imagined during those lonely months of isolation. What I felt was peace. For 3 years, I'd carried the weight of their disapproval like a stone in my chest. Every family gathering I'd missed, every mocking comment in the group chat, every worried phone call from Mom about my risky choices had chipped away at my confidence, making me question not just my financial decisions but my worth as a person. Now, sitting across from them as they grappled with their complete misjudgment of my abilities, I realized something profound. I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need them to admit they were wrong. I didn't even need them to understand how much their dismissal had hurt me. What I needed was exactly what I already had: the unshakable knowledge that I'd trusted myself when no one else would, and I'd been right. "Maya," Kevin said, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it, "I don't know how to apologize for the things I said. The jokes, the comments about supporting you someday. I was so wrong." 3 years ago, those words would have meant everything to me. 3 years ago, I would have melted at the first sign of his respect, grateful just to be acknowledged as competent. But that Maya was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned the difference between seeking validation and earning respect. "Kevin, you don't owe me an apology," I said, and I meant it. "You believed what made sense to you at the time. Traditional employment, steady paychecks, tangible assets. That's what you were taught to value." Dad was staring at the floor, probably calculating how many years it would take to repay me. "Maya, how did we get this so wrong?" The question hung in the air, and I realized he genuinely wanted to understand. Not to make excuses, not to minimize what had happened, but to actually comprehend how his youngest daughter had quietly become more financially successful than the rest of the family combined. "You got it wrong because you measured my success by your standards instead of my results," I said gently. "You saw me eating cheap food and living in a small apartment, and you assumed I was struggling. You didn't see that every dollar I wasn't spending on immediate comfort was working toward my long-term freedom." Mom wiped her eyes with a tissue. "We thought we were being protective." "I know you did, and in a way, you were protecting me. By dismissing my strategy, you gave me the space to develop it without interference. By doubting my judgment, you forced me to become absolutely certain of my decisions. By excluding me from family financial discussions, you taught me to rely entirely on my own research and analysis." The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. The same clock that had marked time through my childhood, through family dinners both happy and painful, through all the moments that had led us to this one. "What I learned," I continued, "is that the most important investment isn't in stocks or bonds or real estate. It's in believing in yourself when no one else will. That's where real wealth begins." Jessica spoke softly. "You're going to help us, aren't you?" I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Of course I am. Not because you're family, and not because I want to prove anything. I'm helping because I can, and because 15 employees shouldn't lose their jobs because of pride or poor planning." This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about choice, and I was choosing generosity from a position of strength. The next morning, I sat at my folding table with a cup of coffee and my laptop, drafting the loan agreement. 6% annual interest, 36-month repayment schedule, business assets as collateral, everything professional, everything documented, everything fair. As I typed, I realized this wasn't just about saving Chen Construction anymore. This was about establishing a new foundation for our family relationships, one built on mutual respect rather than assumptions and outdated hierarchies. Dad arrived at my apartment at exactly 9 a.m., dressed in his best suit, like he was meeting with a bank president. In a way, he was. When I opened the door, he looked around my tiny studio with different eyes than he'd had 3 years ago. Instead of seeing evidence of financial struggle, he was seeing the disciplined lifestyle of someone who prioritized long-term wealth over short-term comfort. "Maya, before we handle the business part," he said, settling into my one real chair while I sat on the air mattress, "I need to say something." I nodded, pouring him coffee in my only decent mug. "I've been thinking all night about what you said, about measuring your success by my standards instead of your results." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I realized I did to you what my father did to me when I started the construction business." This surprised me. Grandpa Joe had always seemed supportive of Dad's entrepreneurial ambitions. "Your grandfather thought I was crazy for leaving my job at the factory to start Chen Construction. He kept telling me to be practical, to think about security. He worried I'd lose our family's savings on a dream." Dad smiled sadly. It took him 5 years to admit I'd made the right choice. 5 years of me proving myself before he could see that maybe I understood something he didn't. The parallel hit me like a physical blow. Dad, I had no idea. The difference is, it took me 25 years to make the same mistake with you that he made with me. And you were right from the beginning. He pulled out his reading glasses and examined the loan agreement I'd printed. These terms are more than fair, Maya. Any bank would charge us double this interest rate if they'd lend to us at all. I watched him sign each page with the same careful attention he'd always given important documents. When he finished, he looked up at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before: genuine admiration. "Would you be willing to teach me about investing?" he asked quietly. "Not because I want to second-guess your strategy, but because I want to understand what I've been missing." The request was so unexpected that I had to blink back tears. "Dad, you built a successful business from nothing. You understand investments better than you think. You just understand them in construction equipment and real estate instead of stocks and bonds." "Maybe we could learn from each other," he suggested. "I could show you how business fundamentals work in the real world, and you could teach me about financial markets." Over the next hour, we went through my investment portfolio together. I explained my research process, my risk management strategy, my long-term timeline. Dad asked thoughtful questions, making connections between market principles and business operations that I'd never considered. "You know what's funny?" he said as he prepared to leave. "Kevin asked me this morning how much we should tell the employees about the loan. I told him we should be completely honest, that Maya Chen is the investor who's saving the company, and that they should be as grateful as we are." For the first time in 3 years, I felt truly proud to be a Chen. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, watching the sunrise through floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city skyline. The space was everything my old studio wasn't: bright, spacious, and filled with furniture I'd actually chosen rather than found on clearance. But more importantly, it represented something I'd never had before: the freedom to make choices based on what I wanted, not what I could barely afford. My phone buzzed with a text from the family group chat, something I'd rejoined 3 months earlier. Kevin. "Portfolio update, up 12% this quarter following Maya's index fund strategy. Thanks for the education, sis." Jessica. "Emma's college fund hit $15,000. Maya, I can't thank you enough for helping me set this up." Mom. "Sunday dinner at 6? Maya, I'm making your favorite lasagna. Dad wants to show you the new equipment we bought for the company." I smiled, remembering how different these messages were from the ones that used to mock my gambling addiction. The family dynamic had shifted so completely that sometimes I had to remind myself this was the same group that had dismissed my financial strategy as foolish just 2 years earlier. Chen Construction was thriving. Dad's loan payments arrived in my account every month like clockwork, always accompanied by a brief business report updating me on company performance. More than that, he'd started implementing some of the financial planning strategies we'd discussed. The company now maintained a 6-month emergency fund and had diversified into both residential and commercial projects to reduce risk. Kevin had become my most enthusiastic student, constantly texting me screenshots of investment articles and asking for my opinion on various stocks. The brother who'd once joked about having to support his broke little sister now sought my advice on everything from retirement planning to real estate investments. But the real transformation wasn't in my family. It was in me. I'd started Maya Chen Financial Consulting 6 weeks earlier, working with young professionals who wanted to build wealth but didn't know where to start. My first client was Zoe, who'd helped me expand my business to include 5 regular customers within a month. Each consultation reminded me of my own journey, of how lost I'd felt at the beginning, and how empowering it was to take control of my financial future. The work was fulfilling in a way my marketing job had never been. Instead of promoting other people's products, I was helping people build the foundation for their dreams. Instead of working to make other companies profitable, I was teaching individuals how to make their money work for them. My investment portfolio had crossed $420,000 last week, but the number felt less important now than it had in the beginning. Money had become a tool for freedom rather than a scorecard for success. I could choose work that mattered to me. I could help my family without sacrificing my own security. I could say no to things that didn't align with my values and yes to opportunities that excited me. The greatest victory wasn't proving my family wrong about my financial judgment. It wasn't even the satisfaction of saving their business when they needed me most. The greatest victory was learning that my worth had never been dependent on their approval in the first place. As I got ready for work, I thought about Grandpa Joe's note. Trust your instincts, sweetheart. The world needs more people who think like you do. He was right. And now I was helping other people discover their own financial instincts, teaching them the same lesson I'd learned the hard way. The best investment you can make is believing in yourself when no one else will. Some risks are worth taking. Some dreams are worth pursuing. And sometimes, the people who doubt you the most are the ones who need your success the most. But you don't chase success for their approval. You chase it for your own freedom. Sometimes the people who doubt you the most are the ones who need your success the most. But you don't invest for their approval. You invest for your own freedom.